Good morning, family. Find your seat, Sarah. How you doing, Gilbert? Wait for people to come on in here so we can actually get started on time for once. I'm usually the one holding us back. All right. To get started with this morning, a little bit of housekeeping. We've got a lot of stuff going on now, with more stuff being added every week. If there is something you would like to get involved with and you just don't know what or how, just ask. Ask me, ask one of the deacons, ask one of the elders. There's going to be more stuff in the future that we start doing. I want there to be as many opportunities for you guys as possible. But I also know that, church is one of those things, if the more involved you are, the more you're going to appreciate it. All right. Church is gonna mean a lot more to you the more you get involved in church. So I want to encourage you guys to get involved if you're not, and if you don't know what you can do or don't know what you want to do, just ask and we'll tell you about the opportunities that we've got going on and the opportunities coming up, because there's going to be plenty of them. So to begin with, for Bible study this morning, we're going to be talking about gifts. Not talking about the miraculous gifts of the Holy Spirit, the healing, the prophecy, all that stuff. That's not what we're talking about. When I say gifts, what I mean, and I'm just going to give you a brief definition as I understand them, it is the things that you can do with excellence with little to no effort. Okay? So we have people who are very much gifted with numbers. We have people who are gifted with craftsmanship skills. We have people who are gifted singers. We have people gifted teachers. We all have those gifts, those things we can do better than most people, that not necessarily you don't have to try, but you have a tendency to not have to try as hard as others, right? So I don't want us to get confused. When I say gifts, I'm talking about in the everyday sense, those skills that you just naturally happen to have more than other people do. Okay? So to begin with, we're going to be in 1 Peter chapter 4, verses 7 through 11, and it reads, "The end of all things is at hand. Therefore be self-controlled and sober-minded for the sake of your prayers. Above all, keep loving one another earnestly, since love covers a multitude of sins. Show hospitality to one another without grumbling. As each has received a gift, use it to serve one another as good stewards of God's varied grace. Whoever speaks is one who speaks oracles of God. Whoever serves is one who serves by the strength that God supplies, in order that in everything God may be glorified through Jesus Christ. To him belong glory and dominion forever and ever. Amen." So this passage, and the reason I added so much more than just that little section about gifts is for context's sake. What we're talking about here is understanding our relationship to God and our relationship to others and knowing where these gifts came from. Okay? But the main point that we're going to pull from this is how we're to use our gifts. Those skills that you have in abundance, we oftentimes think that they belong to us. Okay? And so, we think that they're there to make our lives richer and they're there to serve us. And while that is true to some extent, Jesus Christ did not come for you to live in poverty and suffering. He wants us to use them for others. Okay? Now, we know that this verse of whoever speaks is one who speaks oracles of God. We're not talking about prophecy there. Okay? We're talking about the things that come out of your mouth need to pertain to godliness. You need to speak for God. That's what that means. Okay? So we're not talking about the miraculous spiritual gift of prophecy. We're talking about, for those of you with a gift in speech, for those of you who are orators, natural orators, the things you need to speak need to be coming from God. Right? So if I have a gift at public speaking of proclaiming things to people, of instructing them or motivating them or convincing them of things, I need to be convincing them of the right things. Does that make sense? So those who serve, same thing. There are people who are especially gifted at being hospitable. Okay? I mean, anyone can host, and it's good for people to host, but there are people that just do it with a level of excellence most of us can never achieve. They're just really, really good at it. They know what they're doing. They have a natural gift of understanding what their guests need and want. But the thing is, your service does not stop when you get tired, right? You serve based on the strength that God gives you. And it allows you to serve more and more deeply than you would by yourself. The point of all of this is whatever gift you have, you utilize it not only with God, right? Understanding that that gift comes from God, but you're using it for other people. Does that make sense? Otherwise, I'd be a public speaker selling tickets, right? But that's not how I'm called to use my gift for speech. Yeah. Yeah. And I wanted to go over this because sometimes we do make that misunderstanding of we read the word gifts and we think, oh well, healing and prophecy and speaking in tongues and those things came to pass, and so that's no longer applicable. But that's not what this passage is talking about. And we make the mistake of thinking that those gifts we have are by our own credibility or our own ability, or we taught it to ourselves, or we've somehow earned it, or we have a tendency to credit ourselves for the gifts that we possess. And this morning what we're looking at is the fact that God gave you those gifts, but God gave them to you for more than just to serve yourself. So, one thought on gifts comes from 1 Corinthians chapter 12. It says in verse 1, "Now concerning spiritual gifts, brothers, I do not want you to be uninformed. You know that when you were pagans, you were led astray to mute idols, however you were led. Therefore, I want you to understand that no one speaking in the Spirit of God ever says Jesus is accursed, and no one can say Jesus is Lord except in the Holy Spirit. Now there are varieties of gifts, but the same Spirit, and there are varieties of service, but the same Lord, and there are varieties of activities, but it is the same God who empowers them all in everyone." So, the point I want to pull out of this is to tell you that your gift is not more or less valid than the gift of another. Right? It doesn't matter that some people's gift they just more easily come into kingdom work, right? You have a gift of singing, I can put you to work today. It's not hard to figure out how that can apply, right? But if your gift is, we'll say construction, but it might be a little bit more difficult. It might take some time to figure out how we can use that gift for the kingdom. But my point is that both gifts are equal, and they come from the same place. More to the point, regardless of what your skill is, regardless of what that gift is, you're using it to serve the same person. So just because yours is different doesn't mean that you get to use it for a different purpose. Does that make sense? Because the main point here is it is the same Spirit, it is the same Lord, and it is the same God. Regardless of where your gifts lie, regardless of how you end up utilizing them, you're to utilize them to glorify the same person I'm called to utilize mine for. Now we take this in concert with a conversation that we've had a while back about how we're to treat others as holy. Do you guys remember me talking about that? About how people have a godly desire to be glorified? specifically to be glorified by God. Do you guys remember that lesson? When I talked about how all sin is a godly desire that's been twisted. So in that spirit, we understand that I have a responsibility to lift you up, right? To actually, in a way, glorify God by glorifying you. Not on the same level, but that's that word glorify means to enlighten, to lift up. And so we have a responsibility to do that for others, and in doing so, we glorify God. Okay? So when we serve, when we use these skills, these gifts that God has given us, we actually glorify God by using them for other people. Making sure that we're not selfish with them. Verse 7 through 11, to each is given the manifestation of the Spirit for the common good. For to one is given through the Spirit the utterance of wisdom, and to another the utterance of knowledge, according to the same Spirit. To another faith by the same Spirit, to another gifts of healing by the one Spirit, to another the working of miracles, to another prophecy, to another the ability to distinguish between spirits, to another various kinds of tongues, to another the interpretation of tongues. All these are empowered by one and the same Spirit, who apportions to each one individually as he wills. So a few points from here. First of all, we don't mourn the fact that I don't have the skill you have. I have no business feeling begrudged that I wasn't given the same gift as you. Because God gives you the gift he wants you to have. And he gives me the gift he wants me to have. And the beautiful part of this is if it all comes from the same Spirit, then they're all valid. Like your gift is as valuable as anyone else's. Now, there's an underlying theme that we're getting from this passage in 1 Corinthians, and that's going back to what I always go back to, and that's unity, right? Because we understand that if our gifts all come from the same Spirit, then that's the thing that connects us, okay? And if you're using what you have to serve other people, then you're going to be connected to them through that service. So, to bring this to a practical application, how many of you feel disconnected with the people you come to church with? You don't need to raise your hand. I'm not here to call anyone out. I just want you to be considering the question for yourselves, okay? And if you're being honest, most of us have at least somebody in the church that we feel very disconnected with, okay? I've got people here like that. And I'm sure there's not one person in this room that doesn't have somebody that they feel that way about. Let me ask you, that person you feel disconnected with, how much do you interact with them? How much have you served that person? Those skills that God has given you, how much have you employed them for that person? Because I would caution, warn, and suggest that if you're feeling disconnected to somebody in the brotherhood, it's because you're not doing those things. Because it is really hard to work alongside somebody and not create some kind of a bond. It is really hard to serve somebody and not create some kind of a bond. If you're not feeling the connection of familial ties to other people in the congregation, then you need to start searching for that connection. You need to start searching for that unity. And the easiest and best way to do that is to serve one another.
That's easy to say.
Well, sure.
Service.
I'll be honest, the entire Bible is easy to say. Sure, it can be difficult, especially when it means putting aside your own personal preferences and your personal judgments against somebody, to put those aside and to serve them anyways in the hope of reconciling a relationship. It can be extremely difficult, but it's a matter of putting aside your pride. It's a matter of being able to humble yourself and saying that I'm okay admitting that I'm wrong for this, and I want this to be fixed more than I want it to be right. Right? Because I have people that I struggle with, and I'm convinced that I've never done wrong. Right? I mean, if I'm being honest, we've all had those people, right? Who we're at odds with, and it's not my fault we're at odds. But the fact is do I care that I'm not the one in the wrong, or do I care about the fact that I don't have a relationship with that person? So yeah, all of this is easy said. I mean, this is not, reading the Bible to you is not complicated, and that's pretty much all I've done at this point, is read a couple passages and explain what it says. That's not hard. But at the same time, this isn't complicated to do either. It may be difficult because of the issues that we have internally, but it's not complicated what God's asking us to do. This is if you have an ability, find a way to use that for somebody else. That's not a complicated process. It only becomes difficult because it means we have to maintain a humility and a desire for love and unity. And if it is difficult for us, it's because we lack a desire in those areas.
Or we lack the humility.
Yeah. So moving on. As I said before, the definition I give for a gift, in order to make it very clear, is it is something given to you by God that you don't deserve, but it's also defined by an ability or skill that you have that you can do frequently well with little to no effort. Okay? I'll put it to you like this. There are people in this church that I've met that can sew something together on a sewing machine, and they don't think about what they're doing. I've watched them. I've watched people thread sewing machines and not even pay attention to what they're doing. Right? Beth Potter, I've seen her thread a sewing machine while watching a television. Me, that is a contraption I'm not touching because I have no idea how that works. It would take me hours to figure out how to set up a sewing machine. Yeah. Yep. Nope. Drive a car, read a book, listen to another book while talking on the phone to somebody at work. Yeah, I've witnessed a couple of those things. So, what difference does all of this make? The main point that I have for you, the difference that this is going to make, is bringing us together. Right? It's about making us a family. Let me put it to you this way. How many of you have a marketable skill? You guys know what a marketable skill is? A skill you can make money doing. Yeah, Gilbert's got a marketable skill. You got a marketable skill. I know you do because we talk about it. Yeah. If you're making money, you probably have a marketable skill. Let me put it to you that way. All right? So, you have a marketable skill. Now, a family member comes up to you and they need whatever skill you have. Do you charge them full price? Most of us probably not going to do it, right? I'm not suggesting that you need to go around to the church and just start offering services for free, okay? But what I am saying is that perhaps we shouldn't be looking at the people sharing a pew with us like we look at the rest of the world. Perhaps we should be looking at them like we do when a sibling comes to talk to us. Now, I did landscaping for a decent bit of time, and I loved doing it. If my neighbor came and asked me, somebody on my block came and asked me to landscape their yard or to plan their yard out, I would be charging them full price. You're going to pay me $100 for the design, and you're going to pay me $20 an hour for whatever time it took to come up with the design. And if I implement it, it's going to cost even more. That's how that business model works, right? If Rose came up to me and said, my yard looks like trash, can you design it for me? I'm not charging her that. Why? Because she's family. She's not part of the world in my eyes. So the question is, do we see the people that come to Cedarloo and attend with us and worship God with us and share in the unity of the Spirit with us, that we take communion with every week, that we study with every week, that we sing glory to God with every week? Do we see them as just some schmuck down the block, or do we see them as somebody that we share familial ties with? Are you willing to implement your gifts for another because of personal gain, or are you implementing your gifts for another because God has blessed you with something that somebody else needs? That's my point with these gifts thing. Okay? It's not wrong to not be able to sacrifice everything, right? And so if it's going to cost you something to do, I should be willing to make sure that you at least break even. But you shouldn't be looking to break somebody else's back so that you can make a buck, not when it's family. And my big hope for Christians everywhere, but focused primarily on Cedarloo right now, is that we start looking at each other like that. I don't want you to come to church and be like, yeah, this is my church family. I want you to come to church and be like, this is my family. That is my brother. That is my sister. And I shouldn't be treating you different than I would my actual brother or sister. If anything, I should be concerned with making sure you're treated the best. Because we share something that your siblings, your blood relatives, never will share. Or might not share. We share in the indwelling of the Holy Spirit. And I know what the world says, but I'm going to tell you right now that is a lot more important and a lot heavier than just the fact that you share a couple of chromosomes with somebody. That your DNA is related to somebody. You've been transformed by the blood of Christ. Surely that should mean something. Now, this is going to play a part into our lesson later today. But I want you to think about what that means for how we see one another when we're struggling with the character of another person. Right? Because there's a lot of differences in God's people. I'm going to tell you the one biggest issue in any church is that church has people. Okay? And people have issues. They have baggage. They have character aspects that we don't necessarily agree with. They have worldviews that we don't necessarily agree with. I mean, for instance, guess what? You don't actually have to be a Republican to be a Christian. Did you know that? You can be a Christian and be any political alliance you want. Because why? Because it's politics, not religion. Has nothing to do with faith. Okay? I should be willing to worship God with a Democrat. I should be willing to worship God with a libertarian. I should be willing to worship God with somebody that does not care about politics. If you're wondering, most of you have been worshiping with somebody who doesn't care about politics. That's why I speak openly about it, because I don't think it matters. We've got to understand that our ties come from our faith and who we serve. That is the only thing we need to have in common to love one another. It's the only thing that we need to have in common to be willing to serve one another, to make each other's lives better together. I don't need to share in every opinion with you. I don't need to necessarily see every issue the same way you see it. In fact, we're enriched because we don't. You imagine how monotonous and how boring church would be if we were all just duplications of each other that looked different? Right? What would be the point of conversation? We come in, sing our songs, pray to God, hear the lesson, and then go home. But really, do you even need to leave? If we are all the same, do you even need to hear my lesson? Because you're already reading the Bible the same way I do. What enriches us is that we have different world experience. We have different levels of wisdom that we bring to the table. We have different abilities and gifts and skills that we bring to the table that we can offer to enrich the body of Christ. So what's your concern? What's your focus in life? Is it to get out ahead? Is it to make your life more comfortable? Or is it to serve the body, the house of God, the kingdom of the Lord? Let me put it to you this way. What do you expect out of your wife? You expect your wife to sit at home and only think about how she's going to get ahead? If your wife works, do you expect her to keep her paycheck because she's primarily concerned about her getting out ahead? Or do you expect her to serve the household the same way you do? To be concerned with the going-ons of the household? Do you expect her to be willing to sacrifice for the household? What do you expect out of her? Because if you expect those things out of your bride, don't you think that's probably what Jesus expects out of his? Food for thought this morning. There's some of you guys that have been amazing about this. And some of you that have even had conversations with me and said, hey, I'm really good at this. How can I use that? And I love those conversations because it shows a desire that a lot of people have somehow lost along the way. There's some of you guys that have been on this earth a good, decent while. Okay? And you've learned a good, decent amount. Why would you hoard that to yourself? Right? You want younger people to respect their elders, but the elders aren't sharing with the younger people what they've gotten out of their years on this earth. Right? I should listen to you and obey you, but what you've gotten for yourself is yours and I don't deserve it. Well, you share. Some of you share instruction.
That's an instruction form.
For instance, I'll put it to you this way. Dave, you love fishing, right? Think you're pretty good at it? It's okay. I'm not asking for humility here. You feel you're probably pretty proficient. Is that fair?
I'm better than you.
All right. That's good enough. I'll put it to you this way. I know nothing about fishing. All right? I know you put a hook on a line and you throw it in the water and you hope a fish gets on. That's a pretty, and you put some food on the hook. That's what I know about fishing. All right? Now, can you imagine me going to Dave and saying, hey, I want to learn how to fish? And he says, sure, I offer a class. It's going to be $25 a session. You're going to have to buy your own pole. You're going to have to bring your own bait. I got to pay you to teach me what you enjoy doing? Now think about this. It's not costing him anything. He wants to go fishing anyways. Right? But then he's going to come to me. He's going to say, Nathan, will you help me figure out where to put a flower bed in my yard? And I say, sure. It's going to cost you $25 an hour. And then I'll draw up a drawing for you, a blueprint, and that's going to cost you $100 if you want a copy of that. Well, where's the relationship there? But Dave's my brother. We share the Spirit. We share salvation. We share eternity. So why does our interactions look exactly like it does with somebody I don't even know? Are you guys understanding what I'm saying here? Don't seek to get ahead. Seek to find a way for you to lift up the body. Because I promise you, the more you invest into the body, the more the body is going to seek to lift you up too. The way that Christianity is made easiest is when everyone's doing it together. You try to approach Christ on your own, you try to approach holiness on your own, you are in for a long, rough road. Right? To face every temptation, every pitfall by yourself. I like to think of myself as pretty self-sufficient for the most part. If I don't know how to do something, I can usually figure it out, given enough time and enough desire. But man, why would I want that fight? Right? Why would I ask that of myself when I have 50 people in this room that are all have experience in this walk, all have experience in this struggle? Why would I demand that I learn that by myself when you guys already have that wisdom? I used to have as a kid, my grandpa used to let me write quotes up on his fridge in permanent marker because he didn't care what his fridge looked like. And I don't know, it was bizarre. But I tell you, by the time I was 15, that fridge had no white left on it. But I remember right on the front of this fridge, I had written something I read in, I think it was a daily planner we got from school, because they'd have little quotes in there, and I really liked one, and it said, learn from other people's mistakes. Life's too short for you to make them all yourself. And that really stuck with me. And I try to base my life off that. I try to learn from other people because of that. Because if you have the experience and know what I'm about to do is going to end up in bad things for me, why do I got to experience that for myself? Why would I not want you to just tell me, hey, don't do that. That's not going to end well. Right? We do that for kids. Right? When a kid's about to go touch a hot stove, you say, hey, don't do that. That's going to hurt. Now, usually you're probably a little bit more forceful than that in that situation. But when it comes to our fellow adults, we don't have that same attitude. We don't warn people away from the hot iron. We say, he's going to make his own decisions. He's an adult. When you do that, you deny people the wisdom you've learned through this struggle. And we're no longer lifting each other up. We're no longer walking towards God together. We're just falling all over the place. And we're all falling over the place at the same time because we refuse to share knowledge with people. We refuse to share our wisdom and our knowledge because we know that there's a pothole in the road in front of us, but we're not going to tell anyone else about it. They've got to figure that out for themselves. That's not how this is supposed to work. We go ahead, Dave. Sure. I say we've got to get to a point where we're seeking to make this easiest as possible. I shouldn't want you to struggle on your own.
One of the things that you got to make sure I say this correctly.
Sure.
That there's human aspect. The flesh part. But it's easy to use your abilities for God, and then you go over here and see bread. Not doing anything. You got all these abilities. And bread keeps coming to me and asking me not to use it. And he asks me, bread's not getting that.
Sure.
And that human side of this is bitter.
Sure.
So I guess the advice I would give is to, again, that scripture where it talks about doing everything to glorify God.
Mm-hmm.
So what you're doing is in your abilities that He's given you is doing these things to glorify God and not focus on
Right.
who's doing what, who isn't doing what. Just continue to do what you have to do and let God take care of it.
Absolutely. You've got to evaluate why you're doing what you're doing. Are you doing it because you think they're going to give you something in return, which then goes back into a worldly mindset anyways, even if it's not cash in hand? Or are you doing it because God has blessed you with an abundance of understanding and you have enough to share with others? You know, why are you doing what you're doing? Are you teaching that person because God taught you and you want them to know? Or are you teaching them because you think that person is going to come back and do you a favor? And I would argue that if you think that you have to be reciprocated for every good thing that you're doing for somebody, then you're not treating them as family. You're just treating them as yet another Joe Blow on the street. Go ahead. Mm-hmm. Sure. Sure. So those are the thoughts I have this morning. I want to open this up. Do you guys have comments, questions, arguments? Do you think I'm off my rocker? You know, whatever feedback you guys have, this is the time to give it.
Pride gets me almost every single time until I work up the courage to say, no matter what the reaction is, you're trying to serve somebody. There might be that pride of whatever. What's their reaction going to be? Am I going to be rebuffed? Am I going to be thought of as self-righteous? Are they? What do they think? That's all laid down and not really as important as the higher meaning of what you're getting at. And that takes courage.
Yeah, so I think that you have a good point. I think pride is probably the biggest hindrance to what we're talking about. Pride is the biggest hindrance to service.
So, for example, there's somebody here in the auditorium right now, right here in the sanctuary, who I always think about, I want to get to know this person better.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like, hey, maybe I'm not the kind of personality that person likes, and standoffish, or maybe I'm just too proud or egocentric to get, dig into what he needs or what they want to, accomplish or how I can be of service. Not digging deeper, it makes me feel like I'm not fulfilling that mission statement that God puts on us to do that, what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, I'm thinking,
Why does it have to all be on you all the time?
No, it's just some people have a little more reserved personality.
Sure.
Or different way of thinking. I don't know.
In short, not everybody's as loud as you are, Gilbert.
Also.
No, I understand what you're saying, but it does. It goes in. That pride tells us, I deserve to be repaid for the things I do. I deserve to be glorified for the things I do. That pride tells us I've earned. Go ahead.
Well, sometimes it's not that you deserve to be earned. What I've seen in some congregations, you have at least one individual that he's asking everyone to do these things for him within the church, not because he can't afford it, because he easily can, but
Sure.
because he's trying to get things done on the cheap.
Sure.
And that does cause these other people to have an attitude. And I think that when we ask people to do, I try to, when I ask for someone within the church to use their skill to help me out, I try to make sure they understand, I'm not asking you to save me money.
Yeah.
I'm coming to you because you're a brother in Christ, and I know you're going to treat me fairly.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people in this world will not treat you fairly.
Sure.
And that's the thing that's the really hard part, is knowing, does this person need my help because of financial reasons, or are they just coming to me out because of brother?
And I would like to submit to you an idea here. Again, why are you doing it? Why are you serving that person? Because I'm very fond of telling people you can't allow the darkness in others or out in the world to affect the light within you. And if somebody comes to me and asks for help, I help them because God has blessed me with an abundance and I want to help. That has nothing to do with why that person is asking for help. You understand? The only time that comes into a factor is if helping them hinders me from helping somebody else. That's the only time that should ever play a factor. Fact is, what you have in your personal bank account should have nothing to do with whether I'm willing to help you out. What you possess in life should have nothing to do with whether I'm willing to help. Me helping you out is because God blessed me, not because God didn't bless you. Like I said, the only difference is that if you do have somebody coming and saying, hey, can you do this? Hey, can you do this? And hey, can you do this? And you've got somebody else coming up to you too, you might have to have that decision time where you decide which one has the greater need. Because God hasn't blessed you with enough to bless everyone. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, and
Yeah.
I've seen brothers that they spread themselves so thin that wind up eventually not keeping their promises. They're always promising people stuff, and they try to.
Mm-hmm.
But we're human. We're limited on what we're able.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But I want you to kind of maybe consider that as a possibility for our mindset. Don't, where you're at and what you're doing does not depend on where they're at and what they're doing. And we have those people, right? And I've talked to Dave, and he's heard me call them several times by the same title, call them frequent flyers. They're the people that come into the church and they ask for help, 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 right? Month after month after month. And then you have the really bad ones where they don't come to church, and then they'll come to church for 3 weeks, and then they'll ask for help, and then you don't see them again for a couple of months, right? We call them frequent flyers. Here's the thing. The people of the church have a decision to make. Do we help this person or do we not? And most church people get really sour about it, and they say, no, we're not going to help them. But I would submit to you that if you have the ability to help them, you help them. Not because they need it even necessarily, but because God tells us to do it. And we have this whole big anti-argument where we say, well, are we enabling them? To be fair, that argument does not hold a whole lot of weight. Okay? Because the fact is, they're going to decide what they're going to do with their lives. And that's between them and God. Okay? Unless the only thing we can do is to offer instruction. To say, hey, listen, we really think you need to be taking responsibility. You need to be trying to help yourself. You need to be, let's help you find a job so that you're not in this situation anymore. Whatever. That's fine. But I've not seen, and maybe somebody can correct me here today, but I have not seen one place in the Bible where Jesus Christ gives us the ability to add the caveat on helping somebody of whether we decide that they need or don't need help. And that's something to consider. Because when you bless somebody, when you help somebody, it goes deeper than meeting a physical need. That is a form of spiritual food. And most of the time when you have those frequent flyers, they're starving whether they admit it or not, whether they realize it or not. Maybe that person never comes to the truth. Maybe they never seek to improve their lives. You're not going to be judged based on whether that person continued living that pattern.
So is it wrong for me when, pull up the stoplight, maybe the sign that says, I need food? You say, come on, get in, I'll take you to the grocery store. No, you give them money. And I choose not to give them money?
I would submit to you that you're seeking to help them. If their needs are food and you're looking to give them food, then you're seeking to serve. I don't think that needs to lie on your conscience. I think that what I'm referring to is more if you just decide to say, well, you need to get a job and then leave. That would be a problem. But if you're seeking to help them and they don't want to take the help that you can offer, then I don't think that's on you. Because you're doing what's good to your conscience.
I agree with you. If you're a trying to help them.
Yeah.
It's not the type of help they want.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter whether you could give them what they want. That's their choice to say, no, I don't want that, I want this.
Yeah. Now, if they said, hey, I need food, and you say, well, here's a bottle of water, I would submit that you're not seeking to serve their needs at that point. You know, or here's a coat. Well, it's summer. They don't need a coat. They need food. That's different. But what you're talking about is them saying, I have this need, and you seeking to fill that need the way your conscience allows, and they're not accepting that. That's between them and God.
Well, it's said in McDonald's, and there was a guy sitting out there with a sign that said, I am hungry.
Sure.
My sister was with me, we were in California. And so we went in, we bought a burger, fries, something to drink, and we bought some ice cream. And I told him, he was so angry, he threw it back.
So, I'm actually glad you guys are bringing this example up, because this actually feeds into the comment I just made a long time ago, or a few minutes ago. You are going to always have those people. Okay? Again, you cannot allow the darkness in the world to affect your light. It doesn't matter how angry some of those people get, because it's just like evangelism. It's just like proclaiming the gospel. For every one person that is thankful and appreciates it and accepts it, you're going to have 50 people that hate you for it. It's the same thing. If you're trying to be benevolent, if you're trying to put good works out into the world and help the needy, yeah, you're going to have those people that they want what they want. They're not seeking real help in the way you're offering. It's going to happen. But the next guy might really be in that situation. Are you going to allow the hate in someone else to affect the graciousness and the generosity in your heart? Because you're not going to be judged on their reaction. You're going to be judged on what you did.
Is God like a bulb that shines like an umbrella over
No.
everything? Or is God like the 1,000 points of light where a prism, the light goes through a prism and it shines on to specific spots?
God's
children.
God's light is more like a torch or a candle. Okay? So, you guys watch Indiana Jones? Okay? All right. So what happens when Indiana Jones, he goes into a tunnel or a cave, and there's a sconce or a torch on the wall? What does he do? He grabs it, he lights it up. When he gets to the next one, what does he do? He uses the torch, and he holds it to it, and he lights it up with that torch, right? That's kind of what God's light does. God is light, and when you're baptized, you accept the Holy Spirit in you. That light now is in you as well. You become a light reflecting of God. Does that make sense? You are a torch that is now lit.
Okay, that answers part of the question, that it is it's an illuminating thing. But what I'm asking, in addition to the, yeah, it's illuminating, but remember in Indiana Jones, there was this point of light that came down from a certain time of day, a certain season, and it shone on a specific spot in the cave.
Sure.
And that did something.
Sure.
That's my question is also, what do this person needs shoes.
Mm-hmm.
But this person needs shoes. It's not every person that you encounter who you have to help. You have to be able to discern, right?
Sure. This will be the last one I address because we are out of time, but I will try to answer this the best I can. Okay? Right? I'm right? We're out of time? Okay. So I will answer this the best I can. Discernment plays a factor, right? If Mr. Zacharias came up to you and said, I need new shoes, and you look down and he's got a pair of, $100 or $300 Oxfords on, you probably aren't in a whole lot of need to buy him new shoes. Okay? You know, you might have to have a conversation with him. You know, if I come up to you and I'm wearing a 3-piece and I'm like, hey man, I don't have any clothes. Could you give me some money so I could buy, a shirt and some pants? If I look like this, you probably need to have a conversation as to what I'm really asking for. I understand that discernment plays a certain factor in it. But what I'm warning against is allowing anger and resentment to play a factor in how willing you are to serve another. The fact is, I panhandled for a good while. I didn't panhandle because I made a lot of money at it. I panhandled because there was not one job in Waterloo that would hire me. And it was the only way I could eat most days. Now, there's a lot of people that would never help me out because the last 3 guys they met were not actually looking for help. The last 3 guys they met would panhandle and then get in their car and drive off to their house that they owned. Some of them. I met a few people that panhandle, made quite a bit of money. And I'm okay telling you this because, again, it goes back to my previous point. The fact that that person is dishonest and is deceitful, does it change what God calls you to do? No. God will judge that person for their deceit. He's going to judge you on whether somebody came to you and said, I'm hungry, and you said, go and be filled. God's going to judge you on your reaction to suffering and pain in this world. He's not going to judge you based on how they reacted with it. And gifts really, and we spiraled way off in left field with this study today, which is fine. But gifts actually plays a huge factor into the same thing, right? And this all came about because you had asked about the people who asked for your help and asked for your help and asked for your help and don't reciprocate. God's not going to judge you based on whether they ended up serving the church equally. He's going to judge you based on the fact that somebody came and asked for your help and you said no. That's not scriptural, that is pride. Because you feel like you've been slighted. And if you've been slighted, you go, what does the Bible say? You go to that person, you say, hey, listen, man, I feel like you've wronged me. This is how. You have every right, and some of you really need to hear this last statement, you have every right to inform somebody that you feel wronged. And if somebody's doing that to you and it is burning your generosity out and it is making you stumble, you have every right to go to that person and explain that that's how you feel. That's part of reconciliation. That person might accept it or they might not. That is on them, not on you. So, thank you guys for your questions, your comments, your feedback. It's been great.